The story of Marcus Greene is a powerful reminder of the enduring strength of the human spirit. Wrongfully accused, robbed of his freedom, and separated from his loved ones, Marcus could have easily succumbed to despair and bitterness. But he chose a different path. He chose resilience. He chose hope. And in the end, he chose justice. This story teaches us that even in the face of overwhelming adversity, we must never give up on the pursuit of truth and fairness. It reminds us that the fight for justice may be long and arduous, but it is a fight worth fighting. Marcus's journey also highlights the devastating consequences of prejudice and discrimination. The fact that he was targeted simply because of his race is a stark reminder of the deep-seated biases that still exist in our society. We must all strive to be more aware of these biases and actively work to dismantle them. Furthermore, this story cautions us against the allure of power and the corrupting influence it can have. Charles Whitmore, blinded by his ambition and greed, was willing to destroy innocent lives to protect his own. His actions serve as a warning that power, when wielded irresponsibly, can lead to devastating consequences. But perhaps the most important lesson we can learn from Marcus Greene is the power of forgiveness. Despite the immense pain and suffering he endured, Marcus ultimately chose to forgive those who had wronged him. He recognized that holding on to anger and resentment would only poison his own soul. In a world that often seems filled with darkness and injustice, the story of Marcus Greene offers a beacon of hope. It reminds us that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit can prevail. It encourages us to stand up for what is right, to fight for those who are oppressed, and to never give up on the pursuit of justice. Let us all strive to live by the example of Marcus Greene, to be beacons of hope and agents of change in a world that desperately needs both. The day felt surreal. The prison gates creaked open, and Marcus Greene stepped out, a free man after 25 harrowing years. His face was weathered, his spirit battered, but not broken. He clutched a small, tattered bag containing all he had left in the world. His son DeAndre waited anxiously by the car, his face alight with pride and relief. "Welcome home, Dad," DeAndre said, pulling him into a tight embrace. Marcus smiled faintly, grateful for the one constant in his life. But Marcus' smile faltered as he turned towards the young woman standing nervously behind DeAndre. "Dad, I want you to meet someone," DeAndre said, his voice brimming with excitement. "This is Elena. She's the love of my life." Time seemed to stop as Marcus' eyes locked onto Elena's face. The features were unmistakable. The sharp cheekbones, the icy blue eyes, the blonde hair. It was as though he was staring into the past, into the face of the man who had stolen everything from him. She was unmistakably the daughter of Charles Whitmore, the powerful politician who had orchestrated Marcus' wrongful conviction. Marcus' heart pounded in his chest as the years of pain and rage surged back like a tidal wave. He clenched his fists, his mind racing. How could fate be so cruel? How could his son, his pride and joy, bring the daughter of his enemy into their lives? "Dad, you okay?" DeAndre's voice broke through Marcus' spiraling thoughts. He forced a smile, though it felt like his face might crack under the strain. "Yeah," Marcus said, his voice low and controlled. "I'm fine." "Nice to meet you, Elena," she smiled shyly. "It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Greene. DeAndre has told me so much about you." Marcus' grip tightened on his bag as he stared at the girl who represented everything he'd lost. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, to unleash the fury that had been building for decades. But instead, he swallowed the stow. This wasn't the time. As the car pulled away from the prison, Marcus sat silently in the back seat, his mind already plotting. He had waited 25 years for justice. Fate had delivered his enemy's daughter to his doorstep. Now he had to decide, would he let this chance for revenge slip away, or would he seize it, even if it meant destroying his own family? The year was 1998. Marcus Greene, a humble mechanic, lived a quiet life in the heart of Chicago. He had no enemies, no reason to suspect that his life could change in an instant. That was until the morning the police stormed into his small garage, guns drawn. "Marcus Greene, you're under arrest for the murder of Laura Simmons," one officer barked. Marcus froze, his wrench clattering to the ground. "What? That's insane? I don't even know who that is." The officers didn't care. They hauled him away in cuffs as his neighbors watched in stunned silence. He was thrown into the back of a police car, his mind reeling. Who was Laura Simmons? Why were they accusing him? Hours later, sitting in a cold interrogation room, Marcus learned the horrifying truth. Laura Simmons was the pregnant girlfriend of Charles Whitmore, a rising political star with ambitions of becoming a senator. Laura had been found dead in her apartment, and the evidence pointed to Marcus. His fingerprints on a weapon he'd never seen, a witness who swore they'd seen him near the crime scene. The case was airtight, only it wasn't. Behind the scenes, Charles Whitmore had orchestrated the perfect cover-up. He and Marcus shared the same name, Marcus Charles Greene. It was a convenient coincidence that Whitmore exploited to save himself. He planted the evidence, paid off the witness, and let the justice system do the rest. After all, who would believe a black mechanic over a wealthy, influential white politician? After a quarter-century locked away, he emerged, to a world twisted by the very man who stole his life, a connection forged in the heart of his own family. Marcus sat in the living room of his modest home, his eyes fixed on Elena as she laughed with DeAndre. Her laugh was soft and genuine, but to Marcus, it was a dagger. Every moment she spent in his house felt like a betrayal of the years he had lost. Yet, he couldn't bring himself to confront Heror, his son, yet. He needed answers first. The next morning, Marcus left the house early. He didn't tell DeAndre where he was going. He had one destination in mind: the old courthouse archives. If Elena was truly Charles Whitmore's daughter, there had to be records to confirm it. He had to be certain before taking any steps. As he pored over the dusty files, he found what he was looking for. Elena Whitmore. Born in 2000 to Charles and his wife, Catherine Whitmore. The timeline fit perfectly. His pulse quickened as he stared at her birth certificate. This was no coincidence. But as Marcus continued digging, he found something unexpected. A news clipping from 1998, Laura Simmons, girlfriend of political aide Marcus Charles Greene, found dead in apartment. The headline sent a chill down his spine. There it was in black and white, his name, tied to a murder he didn't commit. Yet, alongside it, a photo of Charles Whitmore looking distraught at a press conference. Marcus clenched his fists, realizing how Whitmore had played the system, how easily he had thrown Marcus' life away to save his own. That evening, Marcus returned home. The smell of dinner filled the house, and he found DeAndre and Elena setting the table. The scene was so normal, so happy, it made Marcus' anger boil over. He couldn't hold back anymore. "DeAndre," Marcus said, his voice low but firm. "We need to talk." DeAndre looked up, concerned. "What's wrong, Dad?" Marcus glanced at Elena, who froze under his gaze. "You didn't tell me your last name?" he said, his tone icy. "Whitmore." Elena's eyes widened. I didn't think it was important." "Why does it matter? Why does it matter?" Marcus repeated, his voice rising. "Do you have any idea what your father did to me? Do you know who I am?" DeAndre stepped between them. "Dad, what's going on? Why are you acting like this?" Marcus took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "Your father, Elena," he said, pointing at her, "is the reason I spent 25 years in prison. He framed me for a murder he committed." The room fell silent. Elena's face turned pale. "That's not true," she whispered. "My father would never—" "Stop lying!" Marcus shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "I've seen the proof. I've lived it. Your father destroyed my life, and now you're in my home, sitting at my table like nothing happened." DeAndre grabbed his father's arm. "Dad, calm down. You're scaring her." Marcus pulled away, his breathing heavy. He looked at Elena, tears streaming down her face, then back at his son, who looked torn between loyalty and disbelief. "I'm sorry," Marcus muttered, turning towards the door. "I need some air." Marcus stepped out into the night, his mind racing. He couldn't let this go, not after everything he'd endured. But what was his next move? Could he bring himself to destroy his son's happiness to get justice? Or was there another way to make Charles Whitmore pay? Marcus spent the night wandering the city, his mind a storm of emotions. The faces of the past haunted him, the sly grin of Charles Whitmore, the cold, lifeless eyes of Laura, and the innocent gaze of his younger self, oblivious to the storm that would rip his life apart. By dawn, Marcus found himself standing in front of an old, decrepit building. It was the bar where he'd first met Charles Whitmore. Walking inside, Marcus felt the weight of nostalgia and pain. The bar was now run down, a far cry from the bustling spot it had been decades ago. The bartender, an older man with a gruff voice, barely glanced up. "What'll it be?" "Information," Marcus replied, sliding a bill across the counter. "About Charles Whitmore." The bartender hesitated, his eyes narrowing. "That's a name I haven't heard in a while." "You sure you want to dig up that kind of trouble?" Marcus nodded firmly. "I don't have a choice." After a long pause, the bartender leaned in. "Whitmore used to run this place, you know. He had his fingers in everything, politics, business, and some less savory activities. You looking to settle a score?" Marcus didn't answer, but the intensity in his eyes said enough. The bartender sighed. "Word is, Whitmore's got his hands dirtier than anyone realizes. He still controls people. People like your son's girlfriend." The revelation hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. Could Elena be involved in Whitmore's schemes? Or was she just another pawn in her father's game? When Marcus returned home that afternoon, the house was eerily quiet. He called out, but there was no answer. His heart raced as he walked into the living room. The sight that greeted him froze him in his tracks. Two men in dark suits sat on his couch, their expressions cold and unreadable. Elena and DeAndre stood nearby, their faces pale with fear. "Mr. Greene," one of the men said, his voice smooth yet threatening. "We're here to deliver a mess. Sage from Mr. Whitmore. Stay away from Elena and keep your mouth shut about the past. Otherwise, your freedom might be short-lived." Marcus clenched his fists. "Get out of my house." The men smirked, rising slowly. "Well, leave for now. But remember, we're always watching." As the door closed behind them, Marcus turned to Elena and DeAndre. "Do you see now? This is what your father does. He doesn't just destroy lives, he owns them." Marcus spent the next few days in a haze of paranoia and anger. Whitmore's men had made it clear that they were watching his every move. He knew he needed to be careful, but he also knew he couldn't back down. He had to find a way to expose Charles Whitmore and bring him to justice. One night, as Marcus lay awake in bed, a plan began to form in his mind. He knew he couldn't go after Whitmore directly. The man was too powerful, too well connected. But he could go after those who worked for him, those who knew his secrets. The next day, Marcus visited the old bar once again. He sat at the same table where he'd met Whitmore all those years ago, his eyes scanning the faces of the patrons. He noticed a man in the corner, a man with a scarred face and shifty eyes. Something about him seemed familiar. After a few minutes, Marcus made his move. He walked over to the man and slid onto the stool next to him. "Remember me?" he asked, his voice low. The man's eyes widened. "You're Marcus Greene, right? The guy who disappeared all those years ago." Marcus nodded. "That's right. I'm back now, and I'm looking for answers." The man's eyes flickered with interest. "Answers about what?" "About Charles Whitmore," Marcus said, leaning closer. "I know he's been up to some shady stuff. I want to know what he's hiding." The man hesitated, then shrugged. "I don't know anything about Whitmore. I'm just a bartender." Marcus didn't believe him. "You're lying," he said, his voice low and menacing. "I know you know something. If you don't tell me, I'll find someone who will." The man's eyes widened again, this time with fear. Okay, he stammered. "He'll tell you what I know." Over the next few hours, the man spilled his guts. He told Marcus about Whitmore's illegal dealings, his connections to the underworld, and his plans for the future. Marcus listened intently, his mind racing with possibilities. He finally had the information he needed to bring Whitmore down. The next day, Marcus met with Elena and DeAndre. He told them everything he had learned, his voice shaking with anger and betrayal. Elena was stunned, her face pale and drawn. DeAndre, however, was furious. "My father is a monster," he said, his voice trembling. "I can't believe I ever idolized him." Marcus put a hand on his son's shoulder. "It's not your fault, DeAndre. He manipulated you, just like he manipulated me." Elena turned to Marcus. "What are you going to do?" Marcus smiled, a cold, calculating smile. "I'm going to make him pay for everything he's done." With that, Marcus left the house, his mind filled with a determination he hadn't felt in years. It was time to bring Charles Whitmore to justice, once and for all. As Marcus drove away from his house, he knew that the road ahead would be long and dangerous. But he was no longer afraid. He had the truth on his side, and he would use it to bring down Charles Whitmore, no matter the cost. The weeks leading up to the trial were a whirlwind of activity. Marcus, with Elena and DeAndre by his side, worked tirelessly to build their case against Charles Whitmore. They gathered evidence, contacted witnesses, and even managed to turn some of Whitmore's former allies against him. The trial was a media sensation. The courtroom was packed with reporters and spectators eager to witness the downfall of the once untouchable politician. Marcus took the stand, recounting his years of wrongful imprisonment and the pain Whitmore had inflicted on him and his family. Elena, with newfound courage, testified against her own father, exposing his lies and manipulations. Even DeAndre, though heartbroken, spoke out against the man he once admired. Whitmore, however, remained defiant. He denied all charges, claiming he was a victim of a conspiracy. His lawyers fought tooth and nail, using every legal trick in the book to discredit the witnesses and cast doubt on the evidence. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as the jury deliberated. Days turned into agonizing weeks. Marcus, Elena, and DeAndre held their breath, hoping for justice but fearing the worst. A collective gasp filled the courtroom. Whitmore's face turned ashen as the judge read out the sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole. As Whitmore was led away in handcuffs, Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice, about reclaiming his life and his name. He looked at Elena and DeAndre, their faces etched with a mix of sadness and triumph. They had faced a powerful enemy and emerged victorious. But the story didn't end there. In the aftermath of the trial, Marcus, Elena, and DeAndre worked to rebuild their lives. They established a foundation to help others who had been wrongly convicted, using their experience to fight for justice and expose corruption. And as for Charles Whitmore, he spent the rest of his days behind bars, a testament to the power of truth and the resilience of the human spirit. His reign of power was over, replaced by a legacy of shame and regret.